Coming up next, City Net 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is made possible in part by TCI and is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Jay Formick. Jay is Executive Director of Oregon Heat. Is Jay here yet? Jay has served as first Vice President and Chair of the Research Board. Jay, I've told many of you in the past, it just seems to me that first Vice President and Chair of the Research Board is the most difficult and demanding job in the City Club, and we really appreciate Jay's contribution. Now finally, Doug Marker. Doug works on the staff of the Northwest Power Planning Council. Doug served as co-chair of the club's issue committees and has been very active on the club's tax reform task force for the past year. Here we go, Doug. Thank you very much. Now, I also want to recognize our past president, Dr. Fran Storrs, who will be leaving the board. Fran, would you please stand? You might have seen in the paper that Fran was recently honored by the March of Dimes for their White Rose Award for her contributions to the community, both as City Club president and as a practicing dermatologist and professor at OHSU. Congratulations, Fran, for your award, and we thank you for your contributions to the City Club and to the community. Now, in addition to these board recognitions, I have two very special awards to make today, the Research Award and the Member of the Year Award. We would have awarded the City Club Award today as well, but this year's recipient, Don Frisbee, is out of town, so he was unable to attend, so we gave him that award earlier this month. The club's Research Award is awarded each year for exceptional contribution to the club's research program. Our winner of this award this year is a team of members rather than an individual. The award goes to the Domestic Violence in Oregon Study Committee. This committee's report was published 2 years ago. The report has been distributed nationwide to people in this field and to the press, and it's been used extensively. The committee has worked tirelessly since then to influence the adoption of its recommendations. Now, I understand that they're soon going to begin work on an update to the report. Now, for outstanding efforts in their demonstration of real advocacy, we present this award to the entire committee. The committee chair, Pauline Anderson, will receive the award on behalf of the committee. So, Pauline, would you come up, please? Let's congratulate Pauline and her committee. Yes, please do. And before Pauline says anything, I want to make sure everybody realizes that Lloyd was not on the selection committee for this award, nor was Pauline on the committee a year ago when Lloyd was chosen as president-elect. Right. So, Pauline.
I want to respond because it's a real pleasure to get a research award. And I'm responding for our committee people are Kurt Wiebring, and I wish you'd stand and remain standing till everybody's up. Marie Avery, Marguerite Oliver, Mike Balter, Ann Romer, Charlotte Swartz, Charles Fosterling, and Leslie Hildula. Along with them, Tom Pickles was a very great help as our research advisor, and Chiquita Rollins is here. She is the domestic violence guru for Multnomah County, who was of fantastic help to us. Thank you very much, all of you, for your work. And as I say, it was a pleasure to receive this award. It was not a pleasure to every week for a year hear horror stories about domestic violence. But the upside of that is that there was no minority report to be voted on. Thank you very much.
Good.
Can I take this?
Thank you, Pauline. Please, let's go this one.
Oh, okay. Who's that?
This is
All right, so bring me this.
All right. Thank you, Pauline, and thank you, committee, for all of your work. The Member of the Year this year is currently co-chair of the Business and Technology Issue Committee, is a member of the Research Committee working on the soon-to-be-published report on density issues, and is also a member of the club's program committee. He's a real City Club junkie, enthusiastically involved in every arm of the club. Kurt Kraus. Where's Kurt? Kurt, thank you for all of your work this past year, and congratulations on receiving this award.
Thank you. May I say something?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Do.
Well, thank you, Pete, and thank you to the Board of Governors. And thanks particularly to the staff of the City Club that provides so much support. Nancy, Paul, Brian, and Winnie. And of course, thanks to my wife, Eleanor, who supports me in my indulgences. I would like to encourage all of you in the many activities I'm in the City Club. I always enjoy the interface with people with strong civic dedication, and would encourage anybody here who is thinking of or is hesitating to join in with some of those organizations, some of those clubs. You'll find them very rewarding. And as far as this, it's always great to get a good performance review. Thank you.
Now, in my last official act as president, I'd like to proceed with the election of the 1999-2000 officers and governors. First, I would like to introduce the returning members of the board who are seated behind us in the back row. You might wave to show everybody else those of us who can't read from a great distance, wave to show us who you are. Let's hold our applause till the end of the introductions. They're Andy Linehan. Andy is a senior environmental planner for CH2M Hill. Carol Stone, executive director of the Regional Drug Initiative. Don Williams. Don is business manager with the Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt Law Firm. Sharon Brabenek, member of the Alumni and Donor Relations at Merrillhurst. And Ned Look, a founder of the Oregon Community Foundation and a community activist extraordinaire. Ned will be serving as a board host today as well. Now, we have 3 members of this year's board who have completed vacant terms of other board members. Each is a candidate of terms of their own. There's Susan Descamp, assistant to City Commissioner Charlie Hales. Arnold Kogan. Arnold is managing partner of Kogan Owens Kogan. And Stephen Schneider, rector at Grace Memorial Episcopal Church. Let's give the returning board members a round of applause for their work. Now I'll introduce our board members who are taking on new positions or those who are first nominated for the first time. Lloyd Anderson is longtime community servant and activist. Lloyd automatically becomes president today from his position as president-elect. Harriet Watson is director of public affairs for Reed College, is nominee for president-elect. David Kish is director of the Bureau of General Services for the City of Portland. David is nominee for treasurer. And Dan Finley, internet strategist and information technology specialist, is also a nominee for governor. Patty Tillett, who isn't here yet, is a nominee for governor. He is principal and head of the Department of Planning and Urban Design for the Zimmer Gunsel Frasca firm. Now, 2 other nominees were not able to be with us today. Les Swanson, who is an attorney in private practice, he's nominee for second vice president, and Nikki Lynch, a financial consultant with Merrill Lynch, becomes the first vice president from her position of second vice president. Now, these nominees have been selected by the club's nominating committee according to the bylaws. There is a mechanism providing for nomination of other officers and other members of the board as long as 3 written recommendations are made from club members 10 days prior to the annual meeting. But because there were no other nominations, I declare these nominees elected by unanimous consent. Congratulations, you have an excellent board for 1999-2000. Now, before we move on, I would like to take a moment to recognize our exceptional staff. Nancy Hedin has been our executive director for 9 years. I've worked with Nancy for the several years I've been on the board, and I cannot imagine a more effective executive director than she has been. I want all of us to recognize that 3 or 4 years ago, we had 5 people on the staff of the City Club and had a couple of people come in on a part-time basis. Over the past couple of years, Nancy's been able to consolidate positions, and we now have 4 members of the staff. She's been able to do that through her effective leadership, and I might say helped by the volunteer members of the City Club, too. So good job, Nancy. Paul Leisner has been our research director for 4 years. Those of you who have served on research committees know what a good job Paul does, and we appreciate all of your work, Paul. Thank you very much. Brian Markovitz, our communications director, has been in his position for 2 years. As I mentioned, he worked on the annual report and oversaw that, and he also comes out with a bulletin each week. He wishes each year. And I think you can see the kind of creative, energetic writer he is by reading those bulletins and the blurb on each of our speakers, and we really appreciate your efforts, Brian. Thank you. Winnie Kane has been in her position for 2 years. You know that when you call the club office and ask to get something done, Winnie is going to do it, and she's going to do it properly. Thank you very much, Winnie. Now, I know that both Winnie and Brian have talked about going back to grad school, but I want to tell both of you that Portland State has excellent night programs, and we encourage you to get involved in those if you're talking about going back to school. So, it's been a very full year. We started the year with 4 ballot measure studies. We've now got 2 long-term studies in their final stages and are getting 2 now underway. 2 information studies are also in the works. So this has involved over 100 City Club members working on this research work. It's been overseen by Jay Formick and Nikki Lynch. So there's been a lot going on research. That's what the club is best known for, and we continue to be strong in that area. We've had a very informative year of programs under the leadership of Steve Schneider, Susan Deskamp, and Harriet Watson. As you know, we started the year with 5 debates. We've had our State of the series. We added the State of the Legislature this year. Next year, through the hard work of the program committee, they've also established they're going to have a State of the Police Bureau and a State of the Courts to add to that slate. So we appreciate all the work they've done. They've also set up an alternative programming schedule with legislative breakfasts and the Chef Series, which incidentally will be renewed in the fall as well, so you'll want to watch for announcements on that as well. They've put together the membership survey with the assistance of the membership committee and Sharon Brabenek, who's been chair of that committee. That survey, incidentally, if you haven't filled it out, you still can. Actually, today is the last day to fill it out and submit it. So I don't know if there are copies of the survey on your tables. I think not, but there are extra copies at the back table. So if you're a City Club member and you have not completed that survey, please fill it out. Let us know what you're thinking. We really want your input. So I leave the presidency of the City Club in good hands. I know Lloyd Anderson is an experienced leader of our community. Lloyd's wife, Pauline, as you know, was president of the club in the early 80s, and I understand that she's kept all of her introductions. So if those of you on the program committee, if Lloyd starts lobbying to have Governor Atiyeh, Mayor Ivancy in, you'll know what he's up to. So with that, I'll turn it over to your new president, Lloyd Anderson.
Well, Pete, for a start, I would like to say that I think you've done an outstanding job as president. I think particularly I've been pleased with, he works hard, he's thoughtful, and he's caring about what goes on in the organization. And he's certainly been helpful to me and others, particularly on the finance committee, when there's been a need to get enough money in the organization. And I think financially, with your work and Dan's work, we've done rather well. So, Pete, I want to present you with this plaque. I'm glad it wasn't up here. You wouldn't have been able to handle your paper. This is to you, Pete. As the outgoing president of City Club, we've been honored to have you as president.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Yeah. Well, I'm honored to be president of City Club. I'll do my best to measure up to the high standards of Pete and particularly the past presidents of the club, especially my wife. The club works well when it has good programs, active research and committees, strong membership and membership support, and participation by them in the various programs that we have going on. And I think, as Pete mentioned, we've got an able staff, and that is a huge plus. So, with a little humor, we should do well for the coming year in spite of the millennium bug. As Pete mentioned earlier, our board host today is Ned Look. He will ask the first question of our speaker. Following Ned's question, we'll be open up from the floor for questions. Again, please no speeches. Try to keep it to 30 seconds. The broadcast of the City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part because of the corporate underwriting of CH2M Hill, Weyerhaeuser, and Pacific Care of Oregon. We're grateful for their support. Barbara Roberts has had a long and distinguished public service career. And I thought we generally not inclined to do this, but I think because of Barbara being around and maybe not hearing it very often, I'd kind of go through some of the things very quickly and just give you a sense again of what she's been involved with. She was elected to the Mount Hood Community College and the Park Rose School Boards early on. In 1978, she became a Multnomah County Commissioner. And in 1980, she was elected to the state legislature, and she became the first, when she was represented, the first woman majority leader. Her first statewide elective office was Secretary of State, and she held that position for 8 years. And again, she became our first elected woman governor in 1990. She's one of Oregon's most well-known politicians. I think she's living proof that H.L. Mencken was wrong when he said that all ex-politicians should be hung as a matter of public sanitation. She moved to Harvard and to the Kennedy School of Government, and most recently to Portland State, where she's associate director of the Mark O. Hatfield Institute for Leadership Development. That's, I would suspect, a business card filled with printing. She's had many awards for her service. Her energy, her willingness to stick her neck out, and her directness have been very refreshing in Oregon politics. The most touching aspect of her life to me was the care and support she gave to her autistic son and the support she gave to her very ill husband when she was governor. Aside from walking on water, Barbara, what else is there? Governor Roberts.
I have to clear the podium. It has plaques on it, and I don't think they're for me. But after Lloyd's introduction, obviously I hope the rope is not either. So thank you for the nice introduction. I cannot walk on water, but we had almost an opportunity to do that this spring. First of all, just let me say how wonderful it is to be home. After spending 3.5 years at Harvard, in Boston, on the East Coast, I can't tell you how much I appreciate Oregon and the Northwest. Our mountains, our clean cities, our public education system, the friendliness of our people, the openness of our political process. I could never be at home in the East. My heart is here, my history is here, my commitment is here, and my grandchildren are here. But I have to confess to you, after 3 years of East Coast obscurity It was wonderful to travel around the state now and have citizens still greet me so warmly. They remember and they seem to care. So the glass house of political leadership seems a very small price to pay for the kind of warmth that remains now that I'm home. Vic Atiyeh tells a wonderful story that I've always loved about arriving at the state capitol on the day that you leave the governorship. Governor Atiyeh says you arrive in the capitol as a peacock and you leave that same day as a feather duster. But Vic and I have had lots of discussions, and we both agree that once you've been this state's governor, Oregon sort of owns you forever. And that makes it very hard to live anywhere but here in Oregon. On the other hand, maybe we can best appreciate Oregon by comparison with the East Coast. So let me begin by the thing I hated worst. I hated the weather. I will never, never complain about the Oregon drizzle again. The winters back east in Boston are long and cold and windy and bitter. I walked to work for 3.5 years with a full-length down coat, earmuffs, gloves, scarves, boots, and mufflers. By the time I went out the door on my way to work, I looked like Doughboy in drag. I gave my 2 down coats, full-length ones, to a homeless program when I left for Oregon, vowing never to live anywhere or be anywhere again cold enough to need them. And the Boston drivers, you have never seen anything like it. They have the highest accident rate of any city in America and a correspondingly high car insurance rate. They believe there are only 2 things on a vehicle, an accelerator and a horn. Now, I was without a car for 3.5 years back east, but it was really okay. First of all, who would want to drive back there? And secondly, I could never have found a parking place in Cambridge anyway. There is no service orientation, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. There is no service orientation in retail stores, service industries, or government. People don't look at you, speak to you, or care, it seems, to know you. It is a very isolating cultural atmosphere, but in all fairness, there are some positives as well. The history of Boston and our nation are everywhere around you. The home of Paul Revere, the burial places of John Hancock and Benjamin Franklin's parents, and even Mother Goose. The Old North Church, the battlefield at Lexington Concord, Bunker Hill, and the sites of the first public school and the first library in the United States of America. The architecture of the area is beautiful and old and very well preserved. The intellectual stimulation of the universities and museums and galleries and public forums, absolutely remarkable. And the closeness of the New England states makes it possible to visit several states on the very same day, or at least you could if they had any highway signs. They do not waste their tax dollars on signage in Boston or Massachusetts. But with all the pros and the cons of Boston and the East, the reason I went there remains the most lasting reward of my stay. The Kennedy School of Government at Harvard offered me a wonderful and significant opportunity to be the director of the state and local government executive programs at the Kennedy School at Harvard meant managing and designing and teaching and learning from hundreds and hundreds of state and local government leaders from every state in this nation. The programs I were involved in were intense and demanding educational experiences requiring absolutely complete immersion and hours of preparation for students during the entire month-long experiences. I spent 12 hours a day, 6 days a week with these participants, and I learned more about the governments of the other 49 states in this nation than you can ever imagine. But I also learned with absolute certainty how positive Oregon's government reputation is throughout the entire country. They looked to me for every opportunity to find out more about the Oregon land use laws and the Oregon health plan, the Oregon benchmarks, our bottle bill, our light rail system, vote by mail, and yes, the conversation with Oregon. At Harvard, I was the Oregon guru. And the longer I stayed at Harvard, the more proud I became of Oregon. Our innovations, our reputation, our government ethics, our election reporting requirements, our willingness to be out front, to be first in the nation, to take a risk on an issue whose time Oregon believed had come. And that pride I felt in our state made me miss even more our quality of life, our good government, our progressive ways of solving issues, our long-term view as stewards of this state. I have seen Eastern government up close, and I've got to tell you, it was highly distressing. I've learned about the governments and the election processes in state after state, and much of it was shocking, at least by Oregon standards. It was not my idea of good government. So when I began to feel that way, it was clear it was time to come home. I'd made a positive difference for over 3 years with hundreds of government leaders, and now it was time to return to the place that practiced what I preached in the East. But 3.5 years, much can change. I returned to a state spending more on jails and corrections than it was on education. I came home to find Oregon's comprehensive land use system under attack at the very time that its impact should be the most important in its 25-year history. I found people fighting against a light rail system that the metropolitan area had spent millions of dollars and over a decade building and expanding to reach more and more citizens in the metropolitan area. Gresham was ready to secede from Multnomah County. A petition was circulating to abolish Metro, and Oregon's roads and highways were turning into obstacle courses. The Park Row School Board, on which I served for 10 years, was an absolute war zone. The state was deadlocked on the siting of a desperately needed new women's prison, and saving our salmon was at a total stage of crisis. The Oregon we have been so legitimately proud of may literally be slipping from our grasp. Nothing remains permanent. It takes hard work and vigilance and teamwork and leadership to preserve the quality we've come to expect in this state. We cannot move forward by pretending that we can turn back the clock. We cannot fix complex problems with simple-minded ballot measures. We can't lock up more and more people for longer and longer for smaller and smaller offenses and expect to ever be able to fund our schools adequately. And we cannot respond to Oregon's issues or Oregon's future with a legislature built on the quicksands of term limits. Legislative term limits are a huge disaster for the citizens of this state and for the future of this state. Almost all institutional memory has disappeared in the legislature. We are witnessing the end of legislators with expertise on complex matters like workers' comp and health care, taxation, transportation, economic vitality, and crucial social services. The rules of order and parliamentary process that made certain that all legislators and citizens had a voice are not part of the knowledge base that remains in Salem. There remain only a handful of mature, experienced legislators who can act as mentors to entering freshmen. Almost everyone seems to be just passing through. Plus, knowledge is power, and in Salem, the power is with the lobby and some staff who know the issues and have the memory and have the history. Now, it's amazing. I mean, just try to think of this in this context. You certainly would not go out and choose a doctor or hire an attorney with no experience or expertise. You wouldn't choose a mechanic, and my God, you wouldn't choose a pilot by the fact that they came without hands-on experience. but we have made absolutely sure that our legislative system in Oregon works exactly that way. Before term limits, about a third of the House turned over every single session. There was a good mix of experience and new blood, and I think that made the legislative process healthy. It allowed Oregon to develop legislative landmarks like the Bottle Bill and the Oregon Health Plan and our land use system and workers' comp reform. Well, don't expect to see that kind of history made again in the legislature. It took 3 sessions to complete and fund the Oregon Health Plan and 2 sessions to reform our workers' comp system. No one will have the time to learn or to devote to such work or such detail again. And these are not partisan comments, nor are they a reflection on some of the very talented and committed members who are currently serving. This is in fact a plea for Oregonians to fix what they broke. And while we're at it, we might consider another legislative change. Up until 20 years ago, the governor of Oregon was chosen by the voters, put his administration, it was usually his, administration in place, and proceeded to govern. He designed budgets, hired staff, brought together a legislative agenda, and appointed citizens to boards and commission. His philosophy, his leadership, and his political skills, if they were used well, allowed him to put his 4-year or 8-year stamp on Oregon. 20 years ago, a legislatively referred ballot measure changed part of that picture. It was touted as a checks and balance measure. It allowed the state Senate to begin a confirmation process on gubernatorial appointments. And for a decade, it worked pretty well. There were less than a handful of rejections by the Senate in an entire decade, and no appointments were held up in committees for long periods of time. The governor continued to appoint, citizens continued to serve, and most boards and commissions operated at full capacity. For the most part, those appointees reflected the governor's philosophy as the voters would very likely expect them to. But this process has gone astray. When talented business leaders like Mike Powell and Cheryl Perrin languish in committee, allowing huge operations like the Port of Portland to stand at risk, the process has gone astray. During my administration, any appointments I made to the boards of forestry or fish and wildlife, DEQ, and other natural resources boards faced an inquisition on the citizens who came before them in terms of their environmental credentials. Organizations like Friends of the Columbia River Gorge and the Audubon Society were treated as radical environmental memberships, and those people were rejected. That is a sign that the process has gone astray. It was never intended to work that way. And I suggest that we may not need it. For 120 years of our 140-year statehood, Oregon governors managed to govern and build their administrations with the people they needed to help them lead. Maybe the time has come to again trust the leadership of the people we elect to be our governors. Then we can let the voters and history be the judge of the choices they made during their term. The idea of an initiative petition on this subject seems to me to be both timely and appropriate. Now, I've never believed that you had to be a governor or even an elected official to make a positive difference here in Oregon. I think I proved that when I was a single mom with 2 children, fighting successfully for my autistic son's educational rights at the Oregon legislature. I learned then that one person, not even elected, could make a difference. I learned it then, and I believe it still. So I intend to keep making a difference. I feel very strongly that it is my turn to give back to the state that has given so much to me. I am currently serving on 6 nonprofit boards. I can't say no, I guess, including Central City Concern, 1,000 Friends of Oregon, the Oregon Hospice Board, a wonderful board called the Women of the West Museum in Colorado, and my long-term commitment to the Human Rights Campaign in Washington, D.C. I am now actively involved in the formation of a new nonprofit organization for preschool abused children. It's called the Portland Relief Nursery, and it's patterned after a highly successful model in Eugene that serves these children and serves their family. This year, we got an F in Oregon on child abuse prevention, an F in this state, and we have to do better. So I want to warn you, you are going to hear from me on this one because I'm helping raise funds for what I believe is a crucial issue in this community. And then, of course, there's a big excitement for me of the past 6 months of my new affiliation with Portland State University. As Lloyd said, as the Associate Director for Leadership Development at the Hatfield School of Government at Portland State University, it does take up my whole card. I am developing a new leadership program for Northwest leaders in our state, local, and tribal governments. It's called the Legacy Program, and it's focused on leading in times of change, and that is certainly the situation here in the Northwest. Our first program is going to begin in September, late September, and we'll repeat the program 3 times a year for leaders throughout the Northwest. Now, in addition to the talented and enthusiastic Portland State faculty from several departments on our campus, the class is also going to experience the wisdom and leadership of Senator Mark Hatfield and Congressman Les Coyne, who have agreed to come and participate with us in the program. If ever we needed to invest in government leadership, now is the time. Executive leadership preparation is a tool that business wouldn't think of eliminating from their budgets, believe me. But we put millions of dollars and thousands of employees in the hands of our government leaders, and I believe strongly that we must prepare them with every asset that is at our disposal. So the Legacy Program is designed to be that strong asset, and I am very excited about the work we're doing and the potential we have to change the leadership ability in the state. Now, I have to tell you, I love being at Portland State and running into Mark Hatfield and Gretchen Kafori. The three of us are sort of like keep on going like the Energizer bunnies, but we really do it because we and others know it matters to Oregon's future. We must all keep being like the Energizer bunny. We must keep trying and keep investing and keep asking the tough questions and debating the issues, those things that the City Club does so well, and taking the risks and being willing to walk out on the end of the limb for an Oregon future where civic pride and political civility and our children are at the very top of the priorities in this state. When I think back on the Oregon of my childhood, which was some time ago, I know it's not the Oregon of today. We are less natural resource based. We are more economically and culturally and racially diverse. We are more heavily populated. Our politics are meaner and more partisan and more expensive. Our leadership now comes from many different molds. We own more boats and motorhomes and TVs and computers. We drive more miles and cook fewer meals and vote less and charge more and run more than we did in the 50s and 60s and 70s. But some things haven't changed. We still love our beaches and our coastline. We love to hike in our mountains and camp in our far-off regions of the state, and we love to listen to the Oregon Symphony. Oregonians will travel for hours to see Shakespeare in Ashland, to see a Western Roundup in Pendleton, a jazz concert or a Rose Parade in Portland, or to ski in Central Oregon. Mount Hood still thrills us, and the Columbia River still nourishes us, and a field of strawberries or rolling hills of grain still take us back to our roots in Oregon. But we must not forget what it means to be pioneers, to plow new ground, to risk everything for a dream. We must not lose the passion for good, healthy political debate and a good Blazer playoff and a school marching band. We must nurture and encourage a new generation of political and community leaders. In November, my first election back home, I applauded. I just literally applauded seeing Eric Stan and Deborah Kafori and Diane Lynn, who's here today, and David Bragdon and Serena Cruz, and so many others, young, new political leaders standing for election and winning. In politics, we are passing the torch to a new generation. The membership of your civic and business groups must reflect that same reality. And I ask you to look around in this room and tell me if it does. Are you passing the torch? Are you moving on? That's what it's called, moving on, and moving new leadership into the places where we once stood, and instilling in these new state and community leaders a passionate commitment to this place we live. And if you're not doing it, why not? As for me, if I'm ever tempted to move again away from Oregon, I will simply recall what I learned while I was at Harvard. 1, there is no place like home. 2, I can't live without mountains. 3, Massachusetts has its ocean on the wrong side. 4, you cannot teach a Harvard professor to say Oregon correctly. I tried 3.5 years, couldn't get it done. 5, government bureaucracy cannot hold a candle to academic bureaucracy, particularly at Harvard, with 300 years of practice. 6, I learned that on whichever coast you are, rail works. I also learned a new appreciation for old things, buildings, antiques, books, history, genealogy, my contemporaries. And finally, I learned, and I repeat, I learned there is no place like home, especially when home is Oregon. Thank you.
Barbara, I've always been critical of your reluctance to express an opinion. It's really refreshing to hear you. You left me a couple of openings, and the challenges that you gave people, and you'll have a lot of questions addressed to that. There's one window opening that you gave me. It involved fundraising. It involved civic participation and responsibility, and pride and leadership. The one question I'd like to address, and it's because one of the benchmarks that you have in a community is the strength and quality of the business community. And you alluded to it here, and how few we actually have of the up and coming joining us. As an aside, I'm also a member of Rotary Club, and as I kind of staggered my 82 years here today, I couldn't help but feel a little personally about what Barbara said. I belong to another organization, and our kind of a slogan this year is we're too few and too old. And that I also took personally. My question is, and behind it, is one of the benchmarks is just to what extent corporate leadership both supports the different organizations within its community and is responsibly active in their role. And the question of support, the national average of giving in this country is about 1% before taxes. Actually, it's getting closer now to 2%. Seattle has a club of business leaders that they call the 2% Club. That is twice what used to be the national average and barely succeeds what the national average of overall giving is. Minneapolis, under the guidance of Ken Dayton of Dayton Stores some 35 years ago, started a club called the 5% Club. And that is 5% of total profits before taxation is given to charity by Minneapolis. There's a relationship between that and the active responsibility that the business leaders in that community have. You couple what we do in our business community. The Oregon Community Foundation is the caretaker of a fund by Portland's Chamber of Business Leadership, Business Giving Alliance that gives, is about 100 of them give 1%. Seattle's 2%, Minneapolis is 5%. We need to do better. The other part of that is the responsibility of leadership. 20 years ago, we had the business communities paying for half the taxes in all of Oregon. And there's a relationship between this. Today, they pay 1/3. My question to you is, as you look at this legacy program that you're doing, what provision have you got to educate our corporate leadership and inspire them and challenge them to do their part?
Wow. How would you like to take that question on? Well, let me first, and thank you, Ned, for the question. Let me put this a little bit in context to think about where we are in Oregon in terms of giving and need. And I think you have to look at both sides of that coin. If you looked at Oregon before Measure 5 and before a number of the ballot measures that dealt with crime and corrections, if you looked at our taxation model in this state, both state and local, back then in 1990, Oregon was about in the middle nationally in terms of tax load. That was state, local taxes. After Measure 5, we are about in the bottom 5 states. So first of all, as a state, we give less to the programs that service the citizens of this state. And at the same time we gave less, the other thing that happened was in the last decade, our population has increased by about 500,000 people. And we have had welfare reform, and we have closed down the fishing industry, and we have dramatically impacted the forestry industry. So a lot of things have changed in our economy and in the needs of our citizens. We also have a tremendously aging population. So putting all that in place, the needs of Oregon are much greater now because the state is not funding, nor are local communities funding nearly the number of services to those in need that we were funding 10 years ago. So if you add together that and the corporate giving pattern in Oregon, which is very low, you have an additional increased problem. The thing I think to some degree that has impacted it, not only, but to some degree, is that most corporations in Oregon, most businesses used to be owned by individuals and families, and now they're owned by conglomerates and chains. So there's not the sense of community identification, but that's not unique to Oregon. It's happening all over the country, and yet corporations in other parts of the country continue to give at a much higher percentage and much higher dollars than they do here in Oregon. I think it is time for us, not as a government and not as a program at Portland State, but as the larger community, the civic community of this state, to say to the corporate community of this state, some of which are part of both of those groups, why not and when? And I think we have to ask more, we have to push more, and we have to let people understand if that giving doesn't take place and government can't do it with tax limitations, then people are doing without. I helped a woman who was living on Social Security recently try to find a small apartment or a very small little duplex that she could live in a neighborhood in which she felt safe. Social Security, if that's all you have, is not very much. And there wasn't any place she could find that she could afford to live, and she moved in with someone else. Now, those stories and a million like them, I mean, the people who are dealing with disabilities and mental health and the environment and, I mean, the issues I mentioned like child abuse, organizations all over the state who are struggling to hold it together. And as individuals, we're not doing bad on contributions, but as a corporate structure in this state, we are not nearly meeting our capability. Taxes have gone down for the corporate structure. They have more flexibility to give than they've had before, and they're not doing it. So the question is, why not? Can we help make it happen? And we don't want to do it with guilt. We want it to be done with the intention that this is a good investment in the community where they have already invested their corporate dollars. And I think it is a matter of individuals really standing up and saying the time has come. And we need examples, role models, who will set the pattern for being 2%ers and 5%ers like Seattle and Minneapolis.
I'm Don Sterling, a member, Governor. What leadership lessons did you draw, if any, from the experience you had with the conversation with Oregon on which you worked so hard?
Well, the one thing I would tell you more than anything else was that we will not come to terms with the major issues of Oregon until the people come to terms with the issues as well. And what I learned was that the asset that came out of it was, and I think of a perfect example, I was doing the conversation with one night, and we had 25 or 30 sites talking to their governor about what they wanted and what our priorities should be in government. And a man down in Coos Bay said, we've got to start spending more money on international trade. Well, they have a big port in Coos Bay, and that was a pretty good thing for him to think. And some man in Oregon City said 4 minutes later, I'll tell you one thing, Governor, you don't need to spend one more darn dime on international trade. It's just poppycock, he said. It's just Oregon trying to look important and international. So I just stopped the conversation and said, now, what does a governor do? I've got two perfectly legitimate views here from the perspective of the citizen. Now I want you citizens to talk to each other. Why is it one of you believe it's important and the other is not, and how do we find a resolution to your sense of priority? So what I think the conversation did was not only teach us who were involved in it, but citizens learn from each other. And we don't do public forums like we used to. People are watching TV and raising families and working 2 jobs and I don't know what else they're doing, but they don't come to the candidates' fairs and they don't come to the public forums in the kind of numbers they did before. So the conversation offered us a unique opportunity for citizens not to learn from their government or the government to learn from the citizens, but for citizens to understand their differences in a way that allowed them to understand that there had to be a compromise in order to reach solution. So I think if I learned anything, it was that we need to find ways to bring citizens together, not to fight, and not just special interest groups, but citizens in general to talk about what they want for Oregon if we're going to solve the issues of Oregon.
Governor, you opened your remarks today with a quick review for us to remember that Oregon once was the leader, once was the generation point of many great reforms which swept the whole nation. Now we certainly have lost that leadership. But our Secretary of State and some others who try to carry on that tradition have given us mail-in voting and some other good things. But now the issue is being focused again in the 2000 election on campaign costs. Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts are the leaders in that whole significant direction. We'll have an initiative ballot issue that will renew the appeal to Oregonians of Proposition 9 of 4 years ago, which was carried by a very large majority, tossed out by the Supreme Court on the theory that money and speech are the same thing. Have you any thoughts? One, is that as important as it seems to me and to many others that it is? Because the legislature has become overwhelmingly dominated by a group which is financed by the excessive expenditure of large amounts of money. I'm not supposed to talk about an issue, so I won't, but will you comment on this whole distinction between the old times and the new?
Well, I think one of the things about the funding of campaigns, one of the most exciting things Oregon had going, and I believe the nation had going, was when we were giving tax credits to citizens, to taxpayers, for contributing directly to political campaigns. It encouraged them to give to their city council race and their school board race and their legislative race, and there was a real tendency for people, once they learned about it, to be willing to give because it was a tax credit for doing it. Well, that got abolished at the federal level and got basically redefined at the state level, taking away the advantage for people doing that. I think the best way to fund campaigns is with lots of small contributions. Now, we can't go back to the time that we could run a campaign on $600 or $1,000 because we didn't used to. I mean, we need to be real honest about this. We didn't used to insure the people who work for us. They didn't get workers' comp. They didn't get unemployment benefits. And we weren't doing the job we had to do legally as employers. So that changed the cost of a campaign. It costs more for postage, more for printing, more for everything else you do in a campaign. So there is a greater cost than there used to be for doing campaigns. But I don't think they need to be funded in the way they're being funded now. And the only way I know that is for us to reinstate some kind of a plan in Oregon, whether we limit the amount of total expenditures, that we at least find ways to encourage citizens to participate in that process and have some tax reward for contributing their dollars to candidates, so that it won't all be done with political action committee money and it won't all be done with large money like it's being done now. And I think we need to go back and examine the tax structure for encouragement about how we get citizens to participate so that the big money is not controlling every election, which it seems to be now. So, and quite frankly, we have a very weak party system in Oregon. We have very little citizen participation. Voter registration is down. Voting is down as it is across the country, and it used to be one of the things we were most proud of in Oregon, our high number of registered voters and our high turnout, and those have gone away. And so, vote by mail or not, we have lost our belief in the election system, and we have to find a way to restore it and then deal with the funding piece as a portion of that component.
Hello, former governor. My name is Pavel Goberman. I'm a member of this club. I have a vision. On May 5th, May 7th, 3 weeks ago, I spoke here about school shooting. I said, don't blame suspect, blame administrations and management. I was right. A few weeks later, U.S. Supreme Court make law about it. But now I want to talk about leadership of Governor Kishaber. What was happening with New Carissa, I blame government. It was their opportunity to save ship, it saved many millions of dollars. He didn't listen. About some now increased taxes for gas. I think don't need too much brain to run state by increasing taxes. And third, government Kishaber want money for education. First yes, we need education, good education, but have to first increase quality of education. You see, children keep books in boxes in school. For what? Have to take home at a study, homework.
What is your question?
My question to, what's your opinion about government's Kishaber performance duty as governor? I think he is better belong to work as doctor than governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if there is ever a governor, at least in modern history in Oregon, that has had a challenge, it is this governor. I felt like I had mine, but looking at the makeup of the House and Senate and the governor trying to bring an agenda forward, I think he really struggles with any agenda in this Capitol building. You know, it's always hard for one governor to evaluate another governor. Because you always want them to take what you've done and carry it on because you were so good. So you always look and say, oh, if he had just done that program of mine a little longer or a little bit.